Understanding Men's Passages, Discovering the New Map of Men's Lives, abridged by Gail Sheehy, read by Vincent Bagnall. It's a guy thing. It has traditionally been assumed that age is kinder to men than to women. My research over the past 8 years has revealed a surprising reversal. Many men 40 and over are having a harder time today making a satisfying passage into the second half of their lives than are most women. Why? Women feel pangs over losing their youth. Men feel dread. It's the dread of losing potency, says my friend Fitzgerald. It's imagining yourself as an actor on stage who has lost his voice. There are some inevitable changes as we tramp the journey of life. Men usually hit them as they would a brick wall and then may fall apart. If they knew what to expect in advance, it could help them to master those changes and profit from them. The point of the book is to help men and their partners to outwit the inevitable changes ahead. Today, particularly for men under 50, the timing of marker events, finishing school, first grown-up job, marriage, parenthood, empty nest, retirement, golden years, has turned out to be unpredictable. What a man is supposed to do and when is not clear. It is both exciting and disorienting, like sailing for a new world, but wondering if you'll drop off the edge for the old one first. The maps and charts are all out of date. Any man who feels a little lost is hardly alone. The first step is to understand the passages that men go through after age 40, and then to discover within the new map of men's lives how you can travel these new passages for yourself with greater awareness and a passport to renewal. Even on a subject as threatening as male menopause, the news is good and getting better. It is gradually becoming recognized as a mind-body syndrome that is perfectly normal, widespread, treatable, and often reversible. Pharmaceutical companies are racing to offer men perpetual virility by popping a pill. As immediate and compelling as is the concern most men have with how their sexual performance might be affected by getting older, there is much more involved in restoring vitality and virility than putting more lead back in the pencil. Mindset matters at least as much as bodily changes. The whole gamut of causes in the impressive armamentarium for fighting male menopause are spelled out. Why single out men? Well, it's not as radical a departure as it might seem. I've been writing about the predictable and unpredictable changes of adult life for both sexes since Passages in 1976. But after 20 years of probing the psyche and interpreting the impact of cultural shifts on both sexes, I faced a humbling admission. Men don't understand women. But at least they know it. Women don't understand men. But they don't know it. Does the following dialogue sound at all familiar? What's wrong? Nothing. Why won't you talk to me? What about? About why you seem so down. I'm just tired. But you just sit around watching TV. Sometimes you can get the most tired from doing nothing. I'm not doing nothing. There are things I have to think about. It seems like you've come to a point in your life where things are changing for you. How does that make you feel? It's just something you have to go through. I'd like to help. Won't you talk to me about it? What is there to say? What is it you want out of life? Just make up your mind and be straight with me. I don't know what I want. Most of us have had such conversations. I know I have survived a few of those, trying to help but only making it worse dialogues. The presumption among women is that they know what's wrong with their men, and that they could fix it if only men would listen. But do many women really know what it's like for a man today? Milton Glaser, a legendary graphic artist and a wise and cherished friend, made this observation of the cultural lag between the genders. Women are developing a new belief system, a new way of viewing life is coalescing. Most men don't know what's happening to them. They don't have an idea what to believe in. For a lot of us, the values we grow up with have been subverted and changed. Men are astonished at this change. They haven't formulated a response to it. It's a time when men are very, very uncertain. Men may not equate change with growth. Generally speaking, they associate change with loss, giving up, being overtaken, failing. It is not seen as a positive part of inner growth and the road to a new kind of power, particularly in the first half of their lives. Men are rewarded for putting blinders on and pursuing their narrow career path. Life seems straightforward. In my corporate life, I've always telling company leaders how important it is to step back, look at trends, see what the future might bring, and plan ahead for it, says a New York public relations man. But in my personal and career life, forget it. He expresses a male view as old as time. I just keep moving forward in a kind of dumb beast way, seeing the next opportunity and throwing my spear at it, taking my lumps and hoping everything will work out for me. Whether as men we are hardwired to think that way, or it's the steady process of socialization, we just don't like to change. You may have been speeding along the route you set in your 20s when suddenly the road turns bumpy, or you hit a washed-out patch and cannot move forward. Or the juice simply drains out of the batteries. How do you recharge yourself? Change gears? Who do you turn to for help? It's become a cliche to say that men don't like to ask questions. Obviously, this is not always true, but men have not been taught to ask questions about their sexual life cycle or the health or psychological well-being. They don't think that they have the time or need for such consultations, unless disaster strikes. Studies show that men make far fewer visits to doctors than women, and when they do go, they generally don't ask any questions. Beneath the silence and stoicism, however, most men over 40 sense that the playing field of life is radically different from the world of their fathers. An economic revolution equivalent to the Industrial Revolution is pitting mature men against younger, computer-savvy digerati. Experience may no longer count for as much in marketplaces focused on the now. Not only are new skills demanded for which several generations, older baby boomers, the silent generation, the World War II generation, are not prepared. But a different attitude is required. The rules of the game between employer and employee have changed. You used to be able to count on the corporate father, the far-seeing, benevolent giver of rewards and reprimands. Now, the corporation is a virtual father, amorphous, non-hierarchical, and you can never be clear where you stand. The ground of relations between men and women has also undergone an earthquake of change. Men of the baby boom and earlier generations were socialized as boys to assume a clearly prescribed role in the benign patriarchy portrayed in popular culture by shows such as Ozzie and Harriet and Leave It to Beaver. As young adults, they were thrown off balance, ridiculed by the women's movement, and later dismissed by some academic activists as belonging to a continuum of dead white men. In middle life, they find themselves competing with a newly confident species of younger professional women. Add the pressure to remain youthful and demonstrate perpetual virility, and many of today's men over 40 are in trouble. If a man keeps playing by the old scoreboard and the old timetable, he's likely to strike out. In this climate of uncertainty, hundreds of men have talked to me candidly about all kinds of forbidden subjects, their concerns about aging, the ebbing of physical strength and athletic prowess, their fears of losing their jobs and their fathers, the meaning crisis they face at the midpoint of their lives, their envy of empowered working wives, their wish to be closer to their children before they lose them, their pre-retirement anxieties, and the whole question of potency in all areas of their lives. Perhaps you never thought these questions would concern you. You've never thought about not being young. A well-known entertainer was shocked the first time he went through the supermarket line and the checkout girl looked right through him. Still handsome, though his jawline is now somewhat softened, he is less cocky and less confrontational. He seems to have calmed down and warmed up, qualities that would presumably enhance his powers of attraction. Yet when we talked, he could focus only on the negative aspects of these changes. You feel separated from youth at the same time you're feeling diminished in physical strength and stamina. You start being passed over by younger men. The sex isn't as great as it was. An incredible desire to be young again comes over you. When I ask men if they ever talk about these questions with their male friends, they almost always shake their heads. No. Why not? Oh, it's a guy thing. Most of the time, they don't even discuss these matters with their wives, who are often preoccupied with their own midlife changes. After a lecture in Pennsylvania, I was stopped by an energetic-looking woman with a book bag slung over her shoulder. I started back to school in my late 30s, she said. I'll celebrate my 42nd birthday by getting my diploma as a clinical social worker. My husband kept complaining, "You're changing." Why? I'm the same man you married 20 years ago. Bingo! That's the reason we're getting divorced. The husband probably thinks that remaining the same and hiding his feelings and frustration is being manly. He may feel stuck, even trapped by his financial responsibilities. He expects himself to be the same provider, the same aggressive competitor he always was, expecting his body to take punishment and burn fat and attract women the way it always did. But beneath the bravado, he probably doesn't feel the same thrill of the chase he did in his 20s. His whole identity is tied up with the status he has achieved so far. If he lets go even a little, what else is there? He cannot imagine how to change. Why should he? When women in midlife go back to school, start new careers, or leave stifling marriages, for the most part they're exhilarated. Even if their salary and status is not as great as a man's, they derive greater satisfaction because they started with so much less. The men they leave behind are often resentful, jealous, having likely helped to finance a former wife's emergence into the status of being my own person at the expense of their own revamping. Linear reasoning is likely to lead a man to think, once I achieve certain things, then I'll be happy. But it is not only titles and material accomplishments that matter. When those external achievements fail to provide meaning and joyfulness on schedule, men become frustrated, confused, angry, and ashamed to admit it. This male malaise has no name. It's a dark continent. Most men don't recognize or refuse to accept that they continue to go through different stages throughout their adult lives, and few men I have studied are even aware that important new passages still lie ahead after 40. And these crossroads demand a full stop and a pause to look inward. They present a man with a chance to stretch and progress, or to lock in and regress. It is necessary to let go of a little control during these times of passage so that space can be made for a yeasty, multi-dimensional new self to grow. Transitional periods are always unsettling for anybody, but a lack of awareness makes it more likely that a man may slide into depression and do all sorts of self-destructive things. More often than not, men are not even conscious of being depressed. They begin slipping down the cliff inch by inch while clutching frantically for anything to hold on to, or simply numbing themselves to what feels like an inevitable descent down the backside of life. It is men in middle life who have the best chance to become masters of their fate, better lovers, better fathers, truer to themselves and their own values, freer to express their feelings and exercise their creativity, more influential, more collaborative, more spiritual. They need only knowledge and a mind open enough to receive it. But time is running out. Not nearly as fast as you think. In fact, the middle years are the stage of potential highest well-being in the lives of healthy, educated people today. You don't believe it? Consider some facts. We are living through the greatest miracle in the history of our species, the doubling of life expectancy since the Industrial Revolution. Back when the U.S. was founded, life expectancy at birth stood at only about 35 years. By 1900, it reached 47 years. One of the most stunning developments of the 20th century has been to stretch the life cycle by an average of 30 years, more than the total gained over 5,000 years going back to the Bronze Age. Another shock of good news on life expectancy appeared in September 1997 in the New York Times. In 96 alone, American men added 6 months to their life expectancy and reached a new high. And that was according to an analysis of U.S. vital statistics by the Centers for Disease Control. The average male lifespan is now 73 years. It is also catching up with the female lifespan, now an average of 79, as the number of AIDS deaths and the incidence of heart disease and cancer decline. Between now and the year 2030, the proportion of people over age 65 will almost double. And this will be true even sooner all over Europe. Fine, you may say, but if an extended lifespan means spending years with my bulb dimming and my body falling apart, forget it. We all look to our fathers and mothers as mirrors of our own aging. Those are miscues in many ways. When our parents turned 50, we thought they were old. They thought they were old. Since 1950, advances have been made in medicine, and more pertinent, public health education through the mass media has prompted profound changes in personal behavior. People in middle life today have a very different life profile from that of their parents, who were expected to turn off their mental engines in their 50s. They didn't dream of running marathons or gulping down hormones to keep them randy until their 80s. People are maturing earlier, physically, but taking longer to grow up emotionally, and much, much longer to grow old. For the middle classes, adolescence is now prolonged until the end of the 20s. Our first adulthood only begins at about age 30. Somewhere around the mid-40s, we enter a major passage into what used to be a rather staid, if not stagnant, middle age. Yet we seem to be more reluctant to grow up than ever before. Of the hundreds of men over 40 whom I've interviewed, most believe they are 5 to 10 years younger than that imposter whose picture somehow slipped inside their passports. Today, the midpoint of adulthood is no longer necessarily 40. It's more like 50. 50 is what 40 used to be. If you're a man now in his 30s, 40s, or 50s, you can adjust your lens on aging. The wife's nightmare. Women constantly ask me, what can we do to get our men to see the light? How do we talk to them about their fear of change and aging without making it worse? The life and death importance of their concerns struck me when I visited the young widow of a high-profile lawyer. He had shattered his second family and shaken up his colleagues by dropping dead from a heart attack in the middle of his customary 5-mile jog. He was scarcely over 50, and it appeared in optimum health. But a year and a half before, he had been dropped from his firm's executive committee. I asked the widow if her husband had expressed his feelings about being fired in private. He was brought up not to show feelings, she said. Stoic. His father always said, you never bring your problems home. I certainly give him a million openings because I was so upset for him. Being the wife, maybe we can express it for them. But he brushed it off. He said, honey, it's just business. Although her husband had had regular physicals, his wife wondered if he might have had symptoms and ignored them. He had never mentioned any chest tightness, angina, or shortness of breath. He followed his motto to the end, gut it through. But, like half of the men who dropped from a heart attack suddenly and unexpectedly, her husband never got up. Over the past few decades, a link has been scientifically established between exposure to loss and a host of physical and psychological illnesses. Exit events that begin to pile up in the second half of life, loss of social status, the departure of grown children, sudden deaths of friends, these and other common occurrences are now considered portents of physical problems. The literature remarks on how frequently an individual under high stress, especially a man, is unaware of its existence and its impact on his life. And this is a problem for all men who define their manliness by expecting themselves to be eternally strong and able to overcome any obstacle alone. They cannot take advantage of today's unprecedented longevity unless they anticipate and deal with it. Men cannot go on living the same way their fathers or even their mentors did. They must be prepared to make changes in their lives consciously, preemptively. Many are not ready. Society has not prepared them for this potential bonus stage of life, and few have developed the skills and inner resources to manage it well. In the movie Moonstruck, a frustrated Olympia Dukakis kept saying, "Why do men chase women?" Finally, Danny Aiello gave her an answer she didn't expect. Because they're afraid of death. There are real reasons men fear death more than women. The risk of dying is greater for males at every age than for females. Beginning at 3 months gestation, the chances of a miscarriage with a male fetus is about twice that for a female. Men age faster than women, get gray hair sooner, lose their sexual drive earlier, rise to anger or frustration a lot quicker, and may experience the shock of change, such as unemployment, a lot harder. The reason men fear death more than women is because they're not directly related to the birth process, observes artist Milton Glaser. The woman who delivers a child understands that she is in the world again, forever. The continuity of human experience runs through the mother. Men don't feel the sense of continuity a woman does. Men are bystanders. For women, change is a given. They lead interrupted lives in and out of work and domestic realms. Their bodies ebb and flow through regular monthly cycles. They become accustomed to the immensity of changes that occur throughout pregnancy and childbirth, seeing their bodies swell out of all proportion and then gradually regain a familiar shape. If such astonishing changes can take place physically and result in the miracle of new life, then change is seen as good. Even when men have all the advantages of money and position, it is hard to take the risk of change or to see the point of altering the familiar game plan. Nobody can do it alone. Women in middle life reach out and form intricate webs of nurturance as their youthful competition for men is replaced by the conviviality of shared experience. Their friendships multiply and deepen. The opposite seems to be true for men in middle life. Wary of allowing other men to glimpse any cracks in the armor or sores on the soul, men tend to raise their guard even higher than before. They rarely make new friends. They may become emotionally dependent on their wives, or even dangerously so. Men rarely read books about their health or stop to re-examine where they've been in the journey of their lives before plunging ahead to the next stage. Psychiatrists tell me that so often men who come to see them about feeling stuck or in a rut cannot allow themselves to make a change, not even when their wives are pushing and coaching. Some men literally have to break down, have a physical blowout or a mental plunge into depression before they can give themselves permission to make a major change. And yet there is so much more to live and to live for. Why do I still feel like a kid? Jim Edwards, a popular radio talk show host in West Palm Beach, Florida, voiced one of the most common comments of men in their 40s. Why do I have a problem thinking of myself as a grown-up? I'm going to be 43 in a couple of months. Most baby boomers recoil from the very mention of middle age. They took longer than any generation to grow up, and they'll damn well take longer than any other generation to grow old. Desperate to hang on to their youth, many simply refuse to move forward. I sometimes feel like I'm still that 19-year-old kid who's now struggling to deal with the responsibilities of being a man, admitted the San Francisco restaurant manager on the slippery slope of turning 40. He can still get away with dressing like a boy chick in his Andre Agassi surfing trunks and pecs-popping Gap t-shirts. And he hoards all his Prince CDs, as if to maintain by osmosis a respectable level of horniness. But he's also married with children and a lawn and insurance payments. I can't believe here I am an adult and no beam of light ever came down and imbued me with any parental or adult powers. The work of adult life is not easy. Each stage not only presents tasks, but requires letting go of some of what worked before. With each passage, some magic must be given up. Some cherished illusion of invulnerability must be tempered by reality, and the kid identity that has come to feel comfortable must eventually be cast off like an outgrown overcoat. If If you want to grow, you must be willing to change. The big impossible. Men's problem with defining and proving their masculinity is an eternal one. True manhood is an elusive status beyond mere biological maleness. In Aboriginal North America, for example, among the nonviolent Fox tribe of the Iowa area, real manhood was described as the big impossible. It was an elevated status that only an extraordinary few could achieve. Masculinity is not something given to you, something you are born with, but something you gain, and you gain it by winning small battles with honor, wrote Norman Mailer in Cannibals and Christians. Current anthropological observational studies would support the novelist. A man is made a man. There is no parallel belief amongst most of the people studied by anthropologists that girls need to be made women. Cultural anthropologist David Gilmour conducted a fascinating retrospective cross-cultural study of manhood and masculinity, and he found that across cultures, from primitive to contemporary urban cultures, attaining the status of real man is an uncertain and precarious endeavor. On every continent, among the simplest hunters and fishermen, as well as sophisticated urbanites, there is a critical threshold that boys must pass through harsh testing before they can gain the right to the gender identity of manliness. In Christian Crete, for example, men must show their manly selfhood by stealing sheep. In the Balkans, a real man is one who drinks heavily, spends money freely, fights bravely, and fathers many children. In Mediterranean countries, rigid codes of action as husband, father, lover, provider, and warrior often reflect an inner insecurity, writes Gilmour. Effete men, the men who are no men, are held up scornfully to inspire conformity to the glorious ideal. The break from a world of women is initiated by a boy's father. A second and more forcible separation from mothers and nursemaids has historically taken place later in most societies, around age 7 plus or minus 1, according to Dr. Munder Ross. In ancient Greece, for instance, the child Alexander, later to become Alexander the Great, was handed over to a male tutor named Aristotle to be instructed in the manly arts and ways of the world. And this ritual still holds in much of the Middle East and Asia, even today. Closer to home, the English tradition of separating well-born boys from their mothers and nannies at the age of 7 and banishing them to the all-male rites and rituals of boarding school, cold showers, cauterized emotions, often physical violence, if not homosexual assault by authority figures, was traditionally meant to toughen men up to take their place in the future ruling class of the British Empire. The empire may be gone, but boys headed for Oxbridge are still subjected to the same tests. American men seem to be particularly insecure. Why? Well, American men have no history because we haven't known what questions to ask. According to the central thesis of a new book, Manhood in America, by historical sociologist Michael Kimmel. And he argues that the quest for manhood has been one of the formative and persistent experiences in men's lives. Over 2 centuries of history, American manhood became less and less about an inner sense of self and more about a possession that needed to be acquired, observes Professor Kimmel. He proposes that the story of American men's efforts to prove themselves is a story of a chronically anxious, temperamentally restless manhood. If most men define their masculinity not so much in relation to women, but in relation to each other, what happens when they have no shared heroes or collective benchmarks? The heart of the matter. A bonded male relationship is usually unarticulated. There's no language to express the depth of feelings one heterosexual man has for another. After a while, it is assumed. Then if anything happens to sever that bond, the one left behind cannot help but wonder if his love was ever returned, or if It was all his imagination. A man takes a huge leap by opening himself up to be hurt. Once you have a bond, male to male, it strips away your defenses and you bare yourself. It's a very hard relationship for men to accept. When you do accept it, you have so much more at risk. Ego and pride and machismo. If it's ripped away from you, for whatever reason, it's hard to recuperate. Tom Romano admits that he went through a dark passage when he lost his father and first glimpsed the shadow of his own mortality. It is apparent that he is itching to broaden his life in some way. He does not want to have to prove himself anymore. But wasn't that what Tony Cox said over and over again? Cox had reached the stage of life at 54 where he believed he had proven everything he needed to prove. Then to be blindsided by a corporate merger, stripped of his status, taken down in self-esteem. Did something die inside? If so, nobody would have known it. People who worked for him used to call him Old Buck-Up. People took all their troubles to Tony. He absorbed everyone else's angst. Passage to your second adulthood. The defining moment that notifies you of your arrival in the strange new country of second adulthood can come at the most unexpected times. For Joe Lovett, it happened one day in the Gents at the Rainbow Room. Lovett is an independent film and TV producer in New York with 25 years of credits behind him. Naturally trim and athletically built, he works at keeping himself well-toned and faithfully pedals a bicycle 300 miles from Boston to New York for an annual AIDS charity event. How old does he feel? Honestly, probably 19. Well, after his quads stopped burning. Invited uptown for a TV industry luncheon at the Rainbow Room, Lovett took particular care in selecting his haberdashery. The suit he wore looked hip, a little downtowny, but still smooth enough for schmoozing with midtown moguls. He was smug as Beau Brummel that day. After lunch, he stopped in the posh men's room. I was at the sink washing my hands. I glanced in the mirror and thought I looked nice. The attendant gave me a towel, I gave him $1, and then as I walked around behind the attendant to go out, I saw this older, tired-looking man walking toward me. We did this little dance. I went to the right, he went to the right. I went to the left, he went to the left. I said, "Oh, excuse me." And then, the defining moment, Lovett realized he was dancing with himself. Most of us find ourselves at 50 in a strange and uncomfortable time warp. The age we feel may be 10 years younger than the age recorded on embarrassingly literal documents such as driver's licenses. But there are certain harsh reminders. President Clinton noticed the perforations in his memory and grumbled about needing notes for the first time, not to mention help for his hearing, the toll of years of rock and roll. He also began to drop idle references into his public remarks about getting old. How does a man demonstrate his masculinity in the middle of midlife? There are the obvious ways. He blows his bonus on a sexy sports car, or starts to tinker with his own chassis. A Los Angeles machinist with a mane of completely white hair now spends 2 hours a day in the gym so he can say, "I look better than most of the 30-year-old guys in this place." There may be snow on the roof, but there's fire in the hearth, baby. Tom Brokaw, the famous NBC nightly news anchorman, hitting a defining moment in his 50th year while writing an essay about men for the New York Times, he started out to update every young man's fantasy, a fling with the older woman, Mrs. Robinson. Then it hit. For an older woman to be interested in me, she'd have to be 60. If a 60-year-old woman decides to have a fling with a younger man, I would guess that 50 is well above the threshold. Many men prove their continued virility on the golf course. You see guys who have achieved everything in their lives, and yet they're out in the golf course playing and playing as if their lives depended upon it. Why? This question used to puzzle one of my interviewees. Now that he's reached 50, he knows. They want to achieve something that will make everyone around them say, "Aren't you great?" They knew they could do it at 30, and they could probably do it at 40. At 50, at 60, and at 70, man, they need to know that they can still do it. Other men hit the great divide at 50, and though they may have been contentedly married for more than 20 years, they start jumping at every young woman who winks at them. It's got nothing to do with my wife. They will often say in our interviews, "I still love her, but I want to know I can still do it." Prospero's passage. We tend to think about the stresses in our lives as unique to our times or to ourselves, but the heart of the problem has always been there. When I saw the New York Shakespeare Festival's production of The Tempest in 1994, I found myself thinking how contemporary, how absolutely applicable to the crisis men face today. As usual, Shakespeare had spotted the dilemma in a much earlier form. The Tempest was a confirmation of the universality of the great passage in men's lives. The Bard's last play is concerned with possibilities for regeneration. He depicts one man's life story as a journey through time as well as space. Initiated by a tempest and a shipwreck that represent the violence, confusion, and even terror of passing from one stage of life to the next, the feeling of being estranged from a familiar world and a sense of self without another to hang on to, the heart of the work is the tempest itself. Prospero, Shakespeare's central character, starts off in The Tempest bitter and rivalrous with his brother, robbed of his political power and isolated on an island, where he fools himself into thinking he is omnipotent and plots to wreak vengeance on his enemies. He uses magic tricks, the way young men do, to compete with older and wiser rivals. Prospero is no longer young, but he is not old either. Scholars usually suggest he is in his late 40s, but like many men, he fears that aging means he will lose his potency. Like many men today who enjoyed comfortably powerful positions but who have been, or fear being, prematurely overthrown or junked, Prospero had been caught completely by surprise when his brother and friend pushed him out of power, and he had turned bitter. When we first meet him, he is a tyrannical parent and a loveless man, but having lost all his external status, he is forced to look inward and ultimately to change. Prospero was indeed the prime duke, but he loved the liberal arts and was dedicated to improving his mind. We might call him a dilettante. Having left the day-to-day business of government to his brother, Prospero seethes. He did believe he was the duke. In those words, I heard Barry Diller's bitter cry when Rupert Murdoch invaded the realm he believed was his, the Fox movie studio he was running. I was just an employee. That shipwreck launched Diller on a tempestuous passage. Prospero, like Diller and many other men, is murderously competitive. When Providence sweeps his treacherous brother and confederates onto his island in another tempest, Prospero recreates for them his own nearly fatal voyage. Were this a Greek tragedy, he would have taken his tidy revenge by repeating the wrongs done to him and become ensnared in a vicious cycle of successive family revenges. Real power, as Shakespeare depicts it in this, his ultimate statement, is not inherited, not a mere matter of princely birth nor of political magic tricks. Real power is developed from within. It is an extension of self-knowledge. The force of it then felt, recognized, and respected by others. That is Prospero's profound, if painful, discovery. Only when he accepts the need for compassion and forgiveness and grows into his own age does he become a good parent who is able to let go of his daughter, give up revenge, and redefine himself as man rather than magician. Having become almost whole in his humanity, he takes back his kingdom while making way for the next generation to come into its own. The brilliant British theatre director Peter Brook believes this character is Shakespeare's complete and final statement. It deals with the whole condition of man. Unlock this puzzle, and a world of understanding may lie before you. Denial of our own aging is hardly new. The dilemmas are greatly exaggerated today by the fact that we are taking so much longer to grow up and so much longer to grow old. But the basic problem existed back in the 17th century. Shakespeare does not tie up the loose ends. The play, like Prospero's story, like life, is unfinished. The most profound questions are left unanswered. What does it mean to need magic? Did Prospero ever need it? And if so, why? And though he talks a good deal about renouncing it, does he in fact give it up? What is the lesson? Love and war with wives, fathers, and children. As men grow older, they need more emotional nourishment. In early stages, when ordinarily the focus is on achieving success and status in their careers, men may feel no pressing need to nourish their relationships with others. In their 50s to mid-60s, something changes. Men are often surprised to find themselves mellowing, warming up, and wanting richer, more complex relationships with their wives, children, friends, and selected family members. "Oh, you just want men to be more soft," was the tease of the famous TV interviewer Charlie Rose. "No," I said, "I just want us all to be more whole." When men begin to enjoy landscaping their homes, take up a musical instrument they once loved, reach out to repair a frayed relationship, or reach inward to reflect on their own lives or their connection to the spiritual realm, it's obvious that a major reorganization of their personalities is in progress. Anthropological studies tell us that as they age, men continue to identify with being male rather than becoming feminized or androgynous, but their earlier need to prove themselves by sexual and aggressive conquests subsides dramatically. They also become freer to express themselves creatively, to experience their emotions, to appreciate their surroundings aesthetically, and to be more artistic, tender, and nurturing. Theories of adult development, on the other hand, having been mostly constructed by men, from Freud and Jung through Erikson and Levinson, have concentrated on achieving the full individuation of the self, which is based on separation from others. The emphasis is on power and control. Very little importance is placed on building mutual relationships with mates, men and women friends, co-workers, adult children, and members of the community. Only in the final stage of a man's life do Erikson and his fellow theorists give their blessing to generativity, the process by which a man becomes paternal and creative in a new sense, feeling a voluntary obligation to guide new generations and to mentor younger associates. Yet it is their experience of relationships that can make grown men cry. When their fathers die without uttering the words "I love you," when their wives abandon them, when they give away a beloved daughter in marriage to another man, just as women do, men have a primary need for human closeness. They too were once infants whose experience of being merged with mother in a timeless mutuality was the closest they came to bliss. But cultural norms call for boys to make an emotionally violent break from the mother and, in the process, to learn how to disconnect from the whole feeling world of relationships. A very different approach to men's psychological development has been worked out since 1981 by psychiatrist Stephen Bergman and his wife, Janet Surrey, who conduct workshops and research at the Stone Center at Wellesley College in Massachusetts. And they point out that disconnecting is learning how not to listen, how not to register the feelings inside oneself or expressed by others, how to turn off in order to remain in control and get the job done. In place of the old either-or dichotomy, they emphasize the healing power of mutual relationships with men and women both. The goal of development is not to increase one's solitary power and control, but to increase one's ability to build and enlarge mutually enhancing relationships. As the quality of relationships grows, the individual grows. The more connected, the more powerful, writes Dr. Bergman. The important shift for men in middle life is from competing to connecting. And that observation is a result of my 7-year study for new passages. Connecting means being open to both giving and receiving from the heart, not just from the head. It means being willing simply to listen to and empathize with a spouse, not always trying to fix whatever may be wrong. Being able to show a male friend how much you care and being able to accept his affection. Developing an ear actually to hear the feelings being expressed beneath the words used by an adult child or an employee to express their needs or frustrations. Connecting to nature, to music, to the spiritual dimension, tuning into his own subtle intuitions. These are all ways in which a man can enrich and deepen his inner life and render himself less and less dependent on external valuation. Here's the really good news. Our most basic fears about mental decline with aging are challenged by recent research. As we age, brain cells do not automatically die off in 100,000 cell lots, as was erroneously reported. There is some cell death, but mostly brain cells shrink or grow dormant in old age, particularly when there is a lack of stimulation or challenge. But if we introduce vigorous mental stimulation on a daily basis, doing computations or crossword puzzles, learning a new computer program, even an older, developed brain can grow, sprouting new neural foliage and making new connections. Students at the University of California at Los Angeles keep asking Professor Arnold Scheibel when he is planning to retire. The eminent professor, formerly director of the Brain Research Institute at UCLA, is still teaching in the Department of Psychiatry and Neurobiology. In 1977, he was 75. He had no plans to retire. His wife, Dr. Marion Diamond, an equally eminent neuroscientist, is former director of the Lawrence Hall of Science at the University of California at Berkeley and is still actively teaching, researching, and mentoring. In 1977, she was 70. She had no plans to retire. Why? Because of what we have learned from our rats, says Dr. Diamond, an attractive, statuesque blonde with a mind like a whiplash. Just because we have wrinkled faces doesn't mean that the brain doesn't have potential. The brain is able to maintain its plasticity throughout life. She explains the science behind her faith in the regenerative possibilities of even-aged brains. We started with young animals and put them in enriched environments where they had a lot of objects and friends to play with. They grew brain cells. The animals in impoverished environments without toys or friends showed the opposite reaction. Then we experimented with middle-aged animals, keeping them in enriched environments for up to 90 days. Their brain cells showed even greater enhancement. After 40 years of experimentation and analysis, Dr. Diamond can give this assurance. There is no significant loss of brain cells in the healthy brains of people who are living normal, healthy lives all the way up through old age. By dissecting older, healthy human brains, Dr. Paul Coleman, a neuroanatomist at the University of Rochester, replicated Dr. Diamond's work on rats and supported her findings. Again, in people who had been reasonably healthy and mentally active up through advanced age until shortly before their deaths, there was no significant loss of brain cells. More recently, astonishing new research at Rockefeller University has found that certain nerve cells in the brain can actually reproduce. Preliminary evidence suggests that these newborn brain cells can migrate along chains very speedily to repopulate several different areas of the brain, says Professor Arturo Alvarez Boila. The challenge for scientists is to understand what directs these migrations and to learn how to steer new brain cells to repair damaged or depleted territories in the human brain. How long do you want to live? Now, it's one of the most profound questions to ask yourself. Most people I have interviewed reply, I want to live as long as I'm healthy. The going bet of some affluent, well-educated boomers as they back across the 50 age line is that they will double their lifespan. I expect to live to 100, they tell me. Just another pipe dream of age-phobic Americans? An endocrinologist who has pioneered in studying human sex hormones, Dr. Estelle Ramey, doesn't think it's fantasy at all. The point to remember is that if one member of a species can live to a particular age, that means all members of the same species have that potential, Dr. Ramey said, and 120 is about as long as any human can live. It pays to make the effort of maintenance because every day it seems there are amazing new discoveries for how to fortify the human machine and nourish the brain. According to neurobiologist Caleb Finch, a principal investigator at the Alzheimer's Disease Research Center at the University of Southern California, there is no part of an organism that can't be manipulated in some way these days, given the understanding of genetic information. Man does not live by brains and body alone. He requires spiritual nourishment. And it is natural with advancing years to feel a greater hunger for the presence of God in one's life. Most of the people over age 60 I interviewed spoke of actively searching for spiritual commitment and companionship. Often the need is recognized when one of the mainstays to which a man has attached his love, and essentially career, family, physical strength, or health, collapses. And at some point, these things usually do go. The pain of loss, the joylessness, alienation, and disconnection he feels may move a man to seek a higher power to elevate his sense of purpose in being. I believe that each soul has a destiny, a personal calling, a reason that we are alive. James Hillman describes in his provocative book, The Soul's Code, Plato's concept of a soul companion, the daimon. Each human being is imbued with a soul that has a unique calling, and the daimon is the carrier of that personal destiny. Our task is to grow down into the realm of human affairs where we can most freely and fully express that calling. When you experience one of the exit events of life and feel your loss to be inconsolable, it is most important to reconnect with your daimon, then to reestablish duties and customs that will allow you to give back from your better nature. God, or destiny, sends us storms, but usually also provides a breathing space, a time when it is possible to see ourselves clearly, perhaps for the first time, and to glimpse the love of the divine. There are many ways of searching for one's daimon. It need not be through formal or hierarchical religion. What is essential is to detach from your normal and necessarily narrow thinking patterns, to clear your head and relax into a receptive state where you will be ready to find the passion that is yours alone. And one of the many doors to this inner room for creative stock-taking is meditation. One inhales deeply, taking in light and energy, holds the breath, then exhales tensions and one's knot of negative thoughts. Once you let down the defensive walls and allow fear, sadness, or remembered joy to be felt, the subconscious is able to send insights and creative solutions to the surface. If you can learn to induce this state of awareness below the conscious thinking, planning, controlling level, you will have a much clearer awareness of what is really going on around you, and calm and courage will seep in from somewhere else.